We're live.
We are
Cool.
live.
Welcome, everybody. And Bo, you could take the floor.
All right, so today we're going to talk about spirituality in comics. As far as comics in general, I'm not going to cover like each company. I'm primarily going to cover DC Comics and its mature side, which is called the vertical imprint. So what I'm kind of doing here is I'm just looking at the straight spirituality in comic books themselves. Um, it's pretty just broken down how it works. Alright, so we'll get started. There's my hand. Alright, so we're going to start out with the entities. The entities are physical representations of emotions. So if you think about science, you'll have recalled the color spectrum. How they do it in DC Comics is coinciding with the color spectrum. Each color has an emotion, so emotional spectrum. And each one of the colors itself started out as a living entity to represent that emotion, and all the direct power from that emotion comes from that entity. So, breakdown: the center one itself is called the entity, and the entity is actually possessing Sinestro at this moment. This one right here is the butcher. I should have mentioned the entity actually represents life as a whole. We're looking right here, this giant Red Bull over here. Red Bull, that is the butcher who represents rage. Right above the butcher, you see this kind of snake thing. That is orange for avarice. That is Ophidian. Right above Ophidian, we've got Parallax, who represents fear through the color yellow. Right here, direct center, that giant fish typing thing, that is Ion, who is the green entity. Right next to Ion, we're looking at this three-headed bird. That's Adara, who represents hope. Underneath Adara, this indigo color, and it's kind of a squid-type looking thing, that is Parceleth, which represents compassion. And last but not least, we're looking at, down here in this corner, this kind of, literally, it looks like one of the aliens from Alien, except for it's violet. That is the Predator, which represents love. Alright, so first we start off with the entity. In DC Comics, how the existence of their universe starts is with a figure called the Presence. For lack of better terminology, the Presence is identified as God. And what the Presence looks like at the very beginning of existence is just a giant hand opening up and the universe is being created in it. What we're looking at, that is the first living being that was ever created from the Presence was the entity, and the entity is literally the embodiment of life itself. Specifically, every, in this case, alien creature, every creature from Earth has an aspect of the entity in them. And how this works specifically, especially in the Black Lantern series, is that essentially the figure that represents death is trying to kill the entity for the purpose of killing all life in that universe. And the entity itself kind of looks like a giant chicken, and is just solid white. Also has kind of like a humanoid look to it too, combined with that chicken look. Alright, so as represented in the Green Lantern series, we're talking about Ion. Ion is that giant fish creature that I talked about earlier. And Ion is the embodiment of willpower. The origin story of Ion is represented through, after the entity took on life, Ion is the creature that forced itself to move. Literally, it just shows a bunch of protozoa, and Ion, just in this crowd of protozoa, literally moves and then evolves and then the idea of evolution comes into play. The story itself heavily amplifies that Ion had the will to move, and then from that moment formed itself all the way up through the evolutionary line to be the first creature to walk on Earth. And I don't have a really good picture of Ion, but you can look it up yourself. Ion literally looks like a giant fish with legs. And specifically what we're looking at here, one thing I forgot to mention, all the entities have the ability to fuse with an individual. There's most of them have a symbiotic relationship when they do that. Ion is one of these symbiotic types. He has, on several occasions, literally fused into someone, and they're pretty much the equivalent of the living embodiment of willpower. Parallax. Parallax is the embodiment of fear. As the story goes, when they're telling the origin story of all the entities, Parallax represents pretty much the first predatory bug. What we're looking at was, it's in the story, it shows this kind of hornet type creature flying around, and it just decides that it wants food. It can't find any, so it literally murders another creature. And as the story expresses, the creature felt fear for the first time ever on Earth, and so Parallax kind of absorbed that power, and then from then on became more or less a creature that fed off of fear. Parallax regularly comes up as an antagonist in DC Comics, both as the entity itself and as the entity possessed in something else. Most famously, back in the 90s, Parallax was a huge figure when they took out Hal Jordan from the series before bringing him back in 2004. The Predator. The Predator is the embodiment of love. As the story goes, when they're telling the origin story of the entities, the Predator was literally created from the moment that Adam and Eve made love with each other. And what's interesting about the Predator that kind of separates from the other entities is that the Predator is heavily influenced by the mindset of whoever it's the host of. So what we're looking at specific is, there's one story that the Predator actually infuses itself into a guy who's kind of obsessed with this woman, and it literally takes on his traits of like, why isn't she with me? So when it actually embodies someone, they become the head, but whatever heightened emotion they think is love will take like full dominance of the personality itself. So I think the writers kind of did that on purpose, because like the definition of love itself could really vary from person to person, like anywhere from obsession to like, you get the picture. But that's what we're looking at. The Predator itself ends up being kind of like a sidekick to Carol Ferris. If you recall the name Carol Ferris, she was in the Green Lantern movie. She's pretty much been Hal Jordan's love interest, but she eventually becomes a member of the Star Sapphire Corps, which is believers in the violet light of love, and their mascot is literally the Predator. And eventually, Carol Ferris becomes the queen of this little organization, and the Predator literally like hangs out with her as her pet. Adara. Adara is the embodiment of hope. It is the representation of the Blue Lantern Corps. And specifically, Adara kind of has two origin stories. One, it's said that Adara was the first prayer, so the first time someone ever expressed hope. And Adara's other origin story is that it was the pigeon that was released by Noah on Noah's Ark. The story is that he releases the pigeon to go fly on land, and it's flying off, and this is Adara in that story. And eventually, the pigeon gets so overwhelmed with hope that by the time it actually finds the branch to represent land, it literally absorbs the early on hope that it represents, and then becomes Adara. Adara is another entity that can when it does possess people, it just kind of takes a seat. The person who primarily has was the regular personality retains all their personality, but they just have Adara's power. Most of the followers of Adara, the Blue Lantern Corps, are really much like ascetics in the story too. They're very religious. They all depend on hope. They're always like kind of optimistic too. No matter what happens, they're always like, "Oh, this will go well. Don't worry, have hope." And their little, I'm sure some of you have heard me state too. Their little motto is "All will be well," and that directly comes from Adara. Next, Ophidian. Ophidian is the in his origin story is the snake that pretty much convinced Eve to take the apple. The idea behind that was he was greedy. He was trying to in the story they kind of make it seem like he's trying to feel something, but more or less he gets greedy with the idea of knowledge more than anything else, and then he absorbs that, and that's how avarice or greed directly comes in the story. Ophidian is another character that what's interesting is his Lantern Corps, the Orange Lantern. There's only one member because he's so greedy. And with that specifically, greed is powerful enough in this story to actually absorb the souls of other individuals. Ophidian, when he does possess people, he's also an individual that kind of takes a back seat, but they kind of feel heightened sentences of avarice because of his presence within them. The Butcher. The Butcher was spawned from the moment that Cain murdered Abel. If you recall your Bible, you will recall that when the blood fell out of Abel, once it hit the ground, it screamed up to God. This is essentially that blood, that moment. It was enraged, and it formed into the Butcher. The Butcher himself is represented by what looks like a giant bowl that's completely covered in blood, and he doesn't have any kind of dialogue like some of the other ones do. All you hear a bum bum bum, and it's supposed to represent like a heart beating fast, like shoulders rate. The Butcher is another individual where if he does feel someone's rage enough, he will possess them. And what's interesting enough is we're going to talk about him in a little, but there's a figure called the Spectre who represents Spectre's pretty much an aspect of God's vengeance, and he has like a really old story that goes back with the Butcher where they always talk about how they duel each other. And if you ever read Brightest Day, the series Dark Horse Comics, I would actually suggest that one just because of the fact that you get this essentially like fight, like two of the oldest beings in the universe are literally fighting each other. And imagine just like a ridiculous kind of like bullfighter thing going on, but they're completely aware of what's going on at the same time. All right, now we're transitioning away from the entities themselves, and we're going to talk about the Endless. The Endless are kind of unique to this whole universe because what we're looking at is a few years back, actually is more than a decade, DC Comics kind of made a mature side of their stories. This was called the Vertical Imprint. Marvel did the same thing. Like you'll look at Jessica Jones. That's like the mature side of the Marvel universe. The Endless primarily come from the mature side of the DC universe or Vertigo Imprint. All right, so the Endless are kind of in conflict with the story of the movies themselves. Because what we're looking at is the Endless are embodiments of what they are, and it's really, really confusing about how they fit into this entire story when you really look at it, because they represent constant traits of what you have. So, It's kind of hard to tell, but the oldest one is Destiny. There's Death, Destruction, Desire, and there is also Destiny, Death, Destruction. I believe that's all of them. But anyways, so that's what they full on embody. That's their job within the universe. There is a very specific story that starts with the Sandman series. Oh, and Dream. Dream was the last one. So what we're looking at is they're considered constant entities that you would need. They are siblings. No specific ruling about who their father is. They are considered royalty within the Vertigo and DC imprint. There is a story in the very first issues of Sandman where he actually gets away from his captivity. This is Dream specifically, or Morpheus as he's also called. And he ends up in a house that is run by Cain and Abel, and they call him Sire. So when you're looking at the regular hierarchy right there, you've got the second and third human being in existence, and they're calling this guy Sire. So with that specifically, the Endless themselves, like I said, their job's specifically to maintain what they operate, their namesake. So, like, for example, Dream, he handles all nightmares, all daydreams, so on and so forth. Destiny literally has a giant book chained to him that has everyone's destiny written into it. And his job is simply to maintain that the words within the book stay as they are. And so on and so forth. Alright, moving on.
Are you guys still there?
I am.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. Alright, now we're kind of moving into kind of alternate mythologies, if you will, within the DC universe. So what we're looking at right here, I don't know if you can see it too well, that is Rao. Rao is the creator god of the planet Krypton. As the story goes, it's vastly similar to what we know, but in Kryptonian mythology, Ra was first, then he made the universe, then he made Krypton. Specifically, what we're looking at too as well, Ra is also the son of Krypton, literally the red giant that they float around of. So when they see the sun every day, they view it as they're seeing God in the sky. So it's kind of hard to tell. That little blue dot right there, that is Krypton.
Ah, dang. Sorry, guys. And this right here, that is Rao. Moving forward in Kryptonian mythology,
Can you guys see that all right? That is Nightwing and Flamebird.
in the origin story of Kryptonian mythology, it's Rao, and then he makes the first two entities that represent night and day, and that is Nightwing and Flamebird. Nightwing and Flamebird are very much the Adam and Eve of their tradition. What they're looking at is they both represent night and day, but they need each other specifically to live. And how the story goes in DC Comics is, if you look at us having looking for like Messiah figures to return to us and help out humanity and so on and so forth, that's what Nightwing and Flamebird are to Kryptonians. The idea is whenever their people need them, Nightwing and Flamebird go to them. This started out as a concept where it was just people to fill the void, but it gets revealed later on in the story arcs that Nightwing and Flamebird are actual existing entities that will take over Avatar body. And that's where we come to... before I go to the next slide, I should mention there have been several Nightwings and Flamebirds. You will recall the name sounds familiar if you're familiar with Batman comics. For example, the first Robin, Dick Grayson, did take on the mantle of Nightwing, However, it wasn't an avatar representation. So moving on, here are the specific avatar filaments for Nightwing and Flamebird. So right up here, this is Christopher Kent, the son of General Zod and the adopted son of Clark Kent. And below him is Thara Akvar, who is the embodiment of Flamebird. If you're looking for suggested readings, I would suggest their run. It's just called Nightwing and Flamebird, the whole run specifically. And it runs from Superman about 436 to about 400 and I would say like 55, somewhere around there. Alright, Gog and Magog. As you'll notice so far, there are several different gods and goddesses throughout the DC universe. What we're looking at is it's the same generalized concept of what we would view like God as today or Source. So there's essentially the presence, which would be like the generalized God, and then there's all the other deities that we actually would know in mainstream exist in there, as well as gods and goddesses from other planets. So down the hierarchy, there is an area called the Source Wall. The idea is that the presence actually is directly behind that wall itself, and that's where all the excess energy comes from that would create lower gods. From that tradition, we had two planets that were located close by, those planets being Apocalypse and I apologize, I forget the other planet's name. But anyways, they always represented civil war between each other because it was always a dark planet and a positive one. And their tradition ended up getting them killed over and over and over again repeatedly. They would always call each other previously the old gods. Specifically, the last one remaining from the third generation of gods was Gog, which is this entity right here. Gog is... easiest way to explain Gog is he feeds upon wherever he is. So it's very simplistic how he operates. He gets on Earth, he starts eating it. And with people worshiping him, because he does do miracles to gain people's trust, they specifically give him more power, and then he literally eats the entire planet. So you'll notice their names too, Gog and Magog, which were two countries in the Bible. Underneath Gog, he always has a kind of a herald, and in this case, he has Magog, which how Magog operates is he's just a strict herald. He is considered under God status, but in my mind more like a demigod, just a regular person who is given divine powers and runs the little errands for Gog over here. Moving on. Oh no, the mouse is... Alright. We talked a little bit about the Spectre earlier. The Presence always has, in the early on stories, always has little agents to do everything for him/her. The Presence early on, back in about, I believe it was the 40s or 50s, essentially made aspects of itself through angels that it gave more power to. So the Spectre and Eclipso are two of those samples. Both of them were avenging beings. As the story goes, early on, Eclipso, which is this individual right over here, was the avenging angel of God, or also known as God's wrath. So anyone who committed severe sins, Eclipso would go after them. However, what happened was Eclipso kind of took a dark turn and ended up just outright killing anyone who he pleased. From that, Eclipso got imprisoned. What's done here is interesting because it kind of really, in at least our eyes, I would say it reflects a huge change within an environment. They imprison Eclipso inside of a lunar eclipse. And so what happens is anytime there is any form of eclipse within the DC Comics, Eclipso comes out of it. And from there, Eclipso is a being that always has to be grounded in some way or other by being possessed in someone else's body. This was something that was kind of implemented by the presence. The idea originally was the wrath of God being inside the body of a human would kind of stimulate their thoughts and keep them really grounded and not out of control, which Eclipso ended up doing anyway. So anytime there's any sort of an eclipse, Eclipso comes out in DC Comics and causes havoc. And it gets pretty intense before DC Comics did its revamp back in 2011. One of the final stories in the Justice League was literally Eclipso splitting the moon in half. And they get down to the point of like they're asking Eclipso, why are you doing this? And Eclipso says it'll kill humanity, which will kill the prayers, which will kill God. Which in the comic books community, a lot of people kind of threw a fit at, even though it was just fiction. From there, what happened was Eclipso's role gets filled by the Spectre. The Spectre is built the same generalized way as Eclipso, with the exception is it's an entity itself, and it always has to be filled specifically with a dead body, or a dead soul attached to a dead body. So with that, what we're looking at is the Spectre almost always exclusively, when it goes to a new host, it finds someone who is a victim of something, usually a victim of murder, possesses them, and then from there it kind of becomes a traveling show, for lack of better terminology. This being the wrath of God, it literally goes from town to town, finds people who have greatly sinned, and then from there takes them out, and then goes to the next individual on the list from there. Alright, this is probably one of my favorite characters of all time. This is the Phantom Stranger. The Phantom Stranger represents everything mystical and magical within the DC universe. What's interesting about this character is that he went nearly 60 years without an origin story. And I wish I was exaggerating that, but it's pretty much true around that time period. So the Phantom Stranger kind of started out first as like a detective type, but then from there evolved into more or less someone who would just help out when he was needed. As far as powers go, it said he can walk through shadows. It says he can teleport. He can be two places at once. He has physical magical powers. He can bind individuals. The way I view him... Oh, let me straighten that for you. There we go.
Thanks.
I kind of viewed him as more anything else. He's someone who, in very dire need, he just appears. So what ended up happening with the Phantom Stranger back in the 80s was fans kind of demanded an origin story, and so they actually got 4 authors together and gave him 4 origin stories with the idea of fans picking out who he would be, or which one of the origin stories they would like most, to each their own kind of idea. What ended up happening from here is the fans really didn't like that. They were like, well, we want a solid origin story. So most recently, back in about 2011, they gave the Phantom Stranger his origin story. So it's kind of hard to see, but on this picture you'll see he's wearing a necklace of silver. As the story goes, this is Judas Iscariot. The necklace of silver he's wearing are the coins that he took for essentially giving up Jesus. So the idea was they took these powerful entities that kind of represented the Olympian gods, took everything that was from him, and then they put the silver around his neck, and he had to do 40 severe good deeds before he isn't a phantom stranger to anyone anymore. If you're interested in this character, he has several books that run from pretty much about the 1940s to now. If you can find the Blackest Night series, specifically the Phantom Stranger issues, there's 2 of them. He's got a great story in there. His monologues are often kind of cryptic when he's describing himself, but probably some of the best monologues I've ever seen in a comic book he writes. And that comes to my conclusion of everything.
Dude, you just blew my mind. That was rad. Good job. I felt you were very studious about that. Like, how much of a fan of comics? Like, obviously you were, like, let me put it this way. Were you quoting your own knowledge of series numbers and stuff? Or is that like, did you wiki that, or how did that work?
Most of them, that was kind of mostly, admittedly, guesstimation. But
Right.
remembering the Nightwing and Flamebird series, those numbers seem right to me.
Well, I mean, you're that into, like, I'm not saying this in a bad way. You've read all this stuff? Like, you're this into it? That's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I wish I was this into
Like,
comics.
as far as like mysticism and comic books go, it kind of stays with me more than anything else. And like, even so, to give you an idea of how heavy a reader I am on it,
Yeah.
this is the
the wall.
DC Comics Encyclopedia.
Yes.
But no, it primarily stays with me.
When did you start reading comics?
What's that?
When did you start reading? Like, did you grow up reading those? Because you said they were in the 80s.
Some of the ones I started reading, well, I was probably around 6 when I started reading, and I only read for so many years.
Right.
And then as I got older, I kind of really respected them, because it kind of happened because I started watching Smallville, and then it was kind of like, I want to go back to this. So I'd just gotten back from deployment, and I went out and bought, like, probably, I don't know how much in comic books. And
An
from
entire
there,
GI
I
Bill.
started reading.
Not
And I
bad.
bought a bunch of classic ones, too, from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And I ended up getting another version of one of those encyclopedias and just read. And
I had no idea the
it's just been a
origins were so
constant thing.
deep.
Like, if I've ever been really curious, I'll even look up some of the characters on Wikipedia, and I'll just read through the entire page.
Well, what I
until
think
it
is
sticks.
weird is how you were talking about some characters get origin stories after they are manifested, right? I mean, they kind of go back and give them one. That's so crazy to me. That's
The
cool.
I know.
the stranger?
No, like,
Phantom Stranger?
yeah, the Phantom Stranger, that
Hey,
blew my
Amber.
mind when I first read it. I was like, well, where's his origin story? And no, like, I want to say this was like his 5th origin story, the one that came out in 2011. And keep in mind, this is a character who's been around since, like, I want to say the 40s or 50s. And they didn't give him an origin story until the 80s. That's like 40 or 30 years right there. It's crazy.
Yeah, and the depth of the mythological, like, origins and how they paralleled Christianity largely really fascinated me personally, because I was just like, now I'm like gonna have to go look up some comic books. I'm like, wait, what? Judas?
Yeah.
All this stuff?
I do have some suggested reads for you guys too, if you wanted to look into any of them.
Go for it.
All right. So there's the Sandman series.
Yes.
I've heard of that.
Sandman's awesome.
I would highly suggest, if you want to kind of get into a spiritual feel, start with the Sandman series. I want to say the first series is called Preludes and Nocturnes. No.
I think that's it.
So the Sandman series, like the Endless I was talking about, that's where they start. Granted, the beginning of that series, it only has 2 endless. It just has Dream and Death. Let's see.
You were mentioning lanterns earlier. I've never seen Green Lantern movie or any of that. This is that universe?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Green Lantern. There's so many books I could suggest to you guys. Oh, jeez.
Because almost all of the comics you've mentioned, I've either never heard. I mean, I've heard of Green Lantern, but I've never read any of these. Like X-Men and stuff like that. That's like G.I. Joe, Batman. Those kinds of comic books I've heard of, but I've never heard like Gog and Magog. When you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck?
Yeah. Well, if you want to read about Gog and Magog, look into. It's called the Justice Society of America, and I believe it's the 4th series. If you need to look for dates on them, it's gonna be the dates around. I want to say it's 2004 to 2006. Oh, and the series run is called Thy Kingdom Come. Let's see, what else is good?
I'd recommend Hellblazer with the character named Constantine. That's pretty good.
I've heard that. Yeah, that's the movie.
But that's a character
Oh, the
that,
book is
which
the
actually
book is so much better.
based on the spiritual works. So, of course,
Keanu Reeves ruined
both
it.
Hellboy and Constantine are very good examples to explore this kind of mythology and spirituality.
Which one? I didn't hear.
Writers are pretty good in getting their reference. It's a very good character. Forget the Keanu Reeves movie. The comic is much better.
The series is called Hellblazer.
An Angel a while back. This is Justice League Dark. Justice League Dark is a newer series. It's probably about 5 years old now.
I love how it's in
what's cool about this one is it concentrates on all the mystical figures of
Can
the
you bring
DC
it up
universe.
higher?
Raise it.
How's that?
Word.
Better.
Graphic novel.
So it
I
concentrates
like
all
the
the.
cover.
I know, right? Like here we have Dead Man. This is the Enchantress. Madame Xanadu. Constantine's actually right there, flipped upside down. Zatanna, who's like a magician who talks backwards. That would be a cool, if you just want to keep it like on a mystical front, that would actually be a good one to read. There's so many to suggest, it's not even funny.
Well, as far as that goes, like Mysticism, I would say Promethea is a really good one, created by Alan Moore.
Alan
There's a
Moore.
lot.
What's that?
That's he's
Promethea?
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. There's a lot
I've
of just mystical and Egyptian, like everything's in there.
Oh, Promethea?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. I haven't got to read that one yet, but I have heard it's good.
It's awesome.
Let's see.
I'm thoroughly impressed by Bo's. Your geek creds are high now, man. I'm like, whoa! Like you could run a Comic-Con.
Yeah, I've been a few times.
And I mean that in the most respectful way.
I
I'm
had
stoked.
one more that's written down somewhere, but I'm totally blanking my mind right now. Oh, Man of Valor. Specifically look for Superman Man of Valor. Man of Valor pretty much has an origin story for the Egyptian gods and goddesses. Or not Egyptian, for the Mayan gods and goddesses. But it ties into the DC universe. Wonder Woman has a series from about 2006 where she is asking for the gods' help to save her mother. And what initially happens is the Olympians are refusing her help, so she literally goes to every pantheon that you can imagine to ask for help. I forget the exact series. I want to say it's series 4 or 7. And when I say series, by the way, I'm talking about the volumes, so that would be what to look for. And yeah,
Did anyone have any questions about anything you mentioned at all? Or should we stop the broadcast?
I don't
No?
know about the broadcast, but I don't have any questions particularly. It was a good presentation. You totally basically took me from zero understanding to like interested. Like I don't
Thank
know
you.
what's going on, but I'm interested. I picked my interest.
I agree. I thought it was really good. Really in depth.
thank you.
You're very good at presenting.
You could be a substitute
Yes.
teacher so well.
A
We gotta-
substitute?
Or a
and
teacher.
You know what else,
A
guys?
teacher. Why can't he aim
A
higher?
teacher.
We got to figure out a way to do, like, the broadcast that we tuned into where we could actually see the slideshow on our own screens. You know what I mean?
Right?
Marisa, the one that we
Well-
tuned into?
It was secondhand digital.
Yeah, I
Imaging
think
or
we're
whatever.
probably going to have to find a different platform.
That's what I mean, like something that supports where we can tune into his desktop and see what he's
I think
presenting.
Skype does that kinda, where you can drop
Skype
things in.
does it.
Then
Because
let's
actually,
try Skype
yeah,
for the next one.
Well, I think the issue
Yeah.
here was that he has to use two different computers because of the connection.
Oh.
It's not like Hangouts, like because you can screen share and everything here. But yeah, we'll have to figure something else out because I think it would really be cool to see the slides as well. Awesome. Well, thank you.
And
The broadcast. Oh, go ahead.
one more thing, guys, too. I just remembered, if you want to get like a review of all some of the stuff I talked about today, go to Comic Storian.
Say that again?
It's an area on YouTube. His name's Comic Storian,
Like
and
historian with
literally
comics.
he will
Okay.
sum up a whole series for you in like less than 10 minutes.
Word. That's real cool. It's like Cliff Notes comics.
Right?
Sweet. Well, cool.
All right.
I'll go ahead
Thanks,
and
guys.
stop the broadcast, but thanks for hosting it. It was awesome, as
Yes,
usual.
thank you.
Thank you.